The dust kicked up in swirling clouds as the little girl's voice cut through the evening air outside the general store in Silver Creek, Montana territory, asking her father why all the other children had mothers, but she did not. And standing near the pickle barrel with her own heart still raw from loss, a young widow named Catherine Hayes felt those words pierce straight through her carefully constructed walls. The year was 1876, and Silver Creek was one of those rough frontier towns that had sprung up along the mining routes, where men outnumbered women 10-1 and life moved fast and hard. Catherine had been standing there comparing fabric swatches, trying to decide if she should bother making new curtains for a house that still felt empty without her husband Robert, who had died in a mining accident 8 months prior. She was 24 years old, and some days she felt ancient with grief. The cowboy knelt down to his daughter's level, his weathered hands gentle on her small shoulders. Catherine could not help but look over at them, her heart squeezing at the sight. The man appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and kind eyes that held their own measure of sorrow. His daughter could not have been more than 6 years old, with wild brown curls escaping from her braids and a gap-toothed expression of genuine confusion on her freckled face. "Ruby, sweetheart," the cowboy said softly, and Catherine heard the tremor in his voice. "Your mama, she loved you more than anything in this world. She just had to go to heaven when you were born. It is not that you do not have a mother. You will always have a mother. She is just not here with us." The little girl's lower lip trembled. "But I want a mother who can braid my hair proper and teach me to make biscuits and come to the church social with us. Annie Martin says her mother is making her a new dress for the harvest dance, and I do not have anyone to make me one." Catherine watched as the cowboy pulled his daughter into his arms, and she saw his shoulders shake slightly. Without thinking, without planning, without consulting the cautious voice in her head that had kept her safe and isolated these past months, Catherine set down the fabric and walked over to them. "Excuse me," she said quietly, and both father and daughter looked up at her with matching expressions of surprise. Catherine's heart hammered in her chest, but she pressed on. "I could not help but overhear, and I am terribly sorry for intruding, but I just wanted to say something if you do not mind." The cowboy stood slowly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Up close, Catherine could see the fine lines around his eyes, the strong set of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. "No intrusion, ma'am," he said. "I am Jack Morrison, and this is my daughter Ruby." Catherine looked down at the little girl, whose eyes were still wet with tears. She crouched down, bringing herself to Ruby's height. "My name is Catherine Hayes, and I heard what you said about wanting a mother. I lost my husband not long ago, and I have been so lonely in my house all by myself. I do not have any children, and sometimes I wish I did. Someone to bake cookies with, someone to read stories to at bedtime, someone to make pretty dresses for." She paused, her own eyes stinging with emotion. "Maybe I could be someone like that for you. If your father does not mind, perhaps we could be friends, and I could teach you to make biscuits." Ruby's face transformed like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Really? You would want to?" "I would like that very much," Catherine said, and realized with a start that she meant it with every fiber of her being. Jack Morrison stared at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Ma'am, that is incredibly kind of you, but I would not want to impose. Ruby and we have been managing on our own." Catherine stood, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Morrison, I have been managing on my own too, and I can tell you that managing is not the same as living. I am not trying to replace anyone or insert myself where I'm not wanted. I am just offering friendship to a little girl who needs someone, and maybe to a father who could use a hand sometimes. That is all." Something shifted in Jack's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I work the Anderson Ranch, about 3 miles south of town. I have a small house there. Ruby stays with old Mrs. Chen during the day when I am out with the cattle. But Mrs. Chen is getting on in years, and she is not much for teaching little girls the things they need to know." He hesitated, then added, "If you are serious about this, we would be grateful for your company." "I am serious," Catherine said firmly. "I live on Maple Street. The little yellow house with the blue shutters. You could bring Ruby by on Saturday afternoon if that suits you. We could make cookies and get to know each other." Ruby grabbed her father's hand and tugged insistently. "Can we, Papa? Please?" Jack looked down at his daughter, then back at Catherine, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Hope, maybe. Or recognition. The sense that here was another person who understood what it meant to lose someone and keep walking anyway. "Saturday afternoon," he agreed. "We will be there." The next few days passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Catherine cleaned her already spotless house, bought ingredients for 3 different kinds of cookies, and changed her dress 4 times on Saturday morning before settling on a simple blue calico that matched her eyes. She told herself this was about the little girl, about having someone to care for again, but she could not quite ignore the flutter in her stomach when she thought about seeing Jack Morrison again. They arrived exactly on time, Ruby practically vibrating with excitement and Jack carrying a small bunch of wildflowers that he handed to Catherine with an endearing awkwardness. "Ruby picked them," he said, though Catherine suspected he had helped. "They are beautiful," she said warmly, ushering them inside. "Ruby, would you like to help me put them in water?" The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease. Ruby was a bright, curious child, full of questions and enthusiasm. She stood on a chair at Catherine's kitchen table, her small hands carefully measuring flour and sugar while Catherine guided her through making snickerdoodles. Jack sat nearby, ostensibly just watching, but Catherine was acutely aware of his presence. Every time their eyes met, something warm and unnamed passed between them. "My mama died when I was born," Ruby announced matter-of-factly as she stirred the dough. "Papa says it was not my fault, but sometimes I think maybe it was." Catherine's hands stilled. She glanced at Jack, whose face had gone tight with pain. "Ruby," Catherine said gently, "your father is absolutely right. It was not your fault at all. Sometimes terrible things happen, and there is no one to blame. Your mother would have loved you so much, and I am certain she would want you to be happy." "Did your husband die too?" Ruby asked with the blunt honesty of children. "He did," Catherine said. "There was an accident in the mines. He was a good man, and I miss him every day." "Do you think they are together in heaven, your husband and my mama?" Catherine smiled despite the ache in her chest. "Maybe they are. Maybe they are looking down at us right now, glad that we found each other." Jack's voice was rough when he spoke. "That is a nice thought, Ruby girl." They baked 3 batches of cookies that afternoon, and Ruby left with a basket full of them clutched to her chest and flour dusting her nose. At the door, Jack lingered for a moment. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I have not seen her this happy in a long time. You have a gift with her." "She is easy to love," Catherine replied, and realized too late how that might sound. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I mean, she's a wonderful child." Jack's eyes crinkled with the hint of a smile. "I know what you meant. Could we come back? Maybe next Saturday?" "I would like that," Catherine said. "I would like that very much." The Saturdays became a routine, and then the routine expanded. Jack started bringing Ruby by on Wednesday evenings too, just for an hour before bedtime. Catherine read to Ruby from her collection of books, taught her embroidery stitches, and showed her how to identify different wildflowers. She made Ruby 2 new dresses, much to the little girl's delight, and started teaching her basic arithmetic with dried beans and buttons. But it was not just about Ruby, though Catherine tried to tell herself it was. It was also about the way Jack looked at her when she laughed at one of Ruby's stories. It was about the conversations they had while Ruby played with the rag doll Catherine had made for her. It was about learning that Jack had grown up in Missouri, that he had come west after the war looking for a fresh start, that he had fallen in love with Sarah Mitchell at a barn dance and married her after a whirlwind courtship. "She was like sunshine," Jack told Catherine one evening while Ruby napped on the sofa, exhausted from an afternoon of playing. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee, the late summer lights slanting through the windows. Everything was brighter when she was around. When she died, it felt like the whole world went dark. "Robert was steady," Catherine said, "like bedrock. I always knew exactly where I stood with him, and that he would be there for me no matter what. When he died, it felt like the ground disappeared from under my feet. Do you think, Jack asked slowly, that it is possible to love someone like that and then love again? Or do we only get one chance at it? Catherine considered the question seriously. I think the heart is bigger than we know. I think it can hold grief and joy at the same time. I think we can honor the people we lost and still open ourselves to new happiness. She met his eyes. I think they would want that for us. Jack reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I am glad Ruby asked that question in the general store. I am glad you were there to hear it. So am I, Catherine whispered. Their courtship, if it could be called that, was slow and careful. Both of them had loved and lost, and neither wanted to rush into something they were not ready for. But feelings grew anyway, stubborn and insistent as prairie grass. Catherine found herself thinking about Jack at odd moments throughout the day. The way he smiled at his daughter, the gentle way he handled the horses he worked with, the sound of his laugh when Ruby told a particularly outrageous story. Jack started looking for excuses to see Catherine more often, bringing her vegetables from the ranch garden, asking her advice about Ruby's education, finding reasons to linger at her door. The town noticed, of course. In a place as small as Silver Creek, everything was noticed and discussed. Most people were kind about it, happy to see two young people finding comfort with each other. A few clucked their tongues and said it was too soon after their respective losses, but Catherine found she did not care much what those people thought. In September, Jack invited Catherine to the ranch to meet his employer, Walter Anderson, and to see where he and Ruby lived. Catherine borrowed a neighbor's wagon and made the 3-mile journey on a crisp autumn morning when the aspens were turning gold on the hillsides. The Anderson Ranch was a sprawling operation, with hundreds of head of cattle and a dozen cowboys on the payroll. Jack's house was a small, neat cabin at the edge of the property, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that clearly had not seen a woman's touch in years. It was clean but sparse, functional but not homey. Ruby gave Catherine an enthusiastic tour, showing off her small bedroom with its simple bed and the shelf where she kept the rag doll and books Catherine had given her. This is where Papa sleeps, Ruby said, pushing open the door to the other bedroom. It contained a bed, a chest of drawers, and nothing else. No curtains on the window, no rug on the floor, no personal touches beyond a daguerreotype on the dresser. Catherine picked it up carefully and saw a young woman with a sweet smile and flowers in her hair. Sarah. She was beautiful, Catherine said softly. Jack had come up behind her. She was, but she has been gone for 6 years now, and I think it is time I stopped living like a ghost in my own life. That evening, after a supper that Catherine helped prepare on Jack's wood stove, and after Ruby was tucked into bed with a story, Jack and Catherine sat on the porch steps and watched the stars come out. The night was cool, and Jack draped a blanket around Catherine's shoulders. I never thought I would feel this way again, Jack said into the darkness. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over, that I would just focus on raising Ruby and working the ranch, and that would be enough. Is it enough? Catherine asked quietly. No, Jack said. Not anymore, not since I met you. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the starlight. Catherine, I know we have not been courting in any traditional sense. I know we both have pasts and grief and complications, but I need you to know that I have feelings for you. Real feelings. The kind that keep me awake at night and make me look for you in town and count the hours until I can see you again. Catherine's heart felt too big for her chest. Jack, I feel the same way. I have been trying not to. Trying to tell myself it was too soon or too complicated or that I should not care for you the way I do, but I cannot help it. You and Ruby have brought light back into my life. Jack cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reverent. May I kiss you? Yes, Catherine breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the passionate kisses of her youth with Robert. This was different, layered with understanding and loss and the knowledge that they were both choosing each other despite everything they had been through, or maybe because of it. When they pulled apart, Catherine was crying, but they were good tears, healing tears. Jack brushed them away with his thumbs. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly with everyone knowing my intentions. I want to give you time to be sure this is what you want. And when you are ready, when we are both ready, I want to marry you and make you my wife and give Ruby the mother she has been wishing for." "I want that too," Catherine said, "all of it." The courting that followed was the talk of Silver Creek. Jack took Catherine to church socials and town dances, holding her hand proudly and introducing her to everyone who had not already met her. Catherine spent more and more time at the ranch, bringing homemade meals and slowly adding touches to the cabin that made it feel warmer. Curtains for the windows, braided rugs for the floors, wildflowers in jars on the kitchen table. Ruby bloomed under the attention, her wish for a mother slowly becoming reality. Not everything was smooth. There were moments when grief would hit one or both of them unexpectedly. Days when Catherine would see something that reminded her of Robert and withdraw into herself. Evenings when Jack would grow quiet and distant, lost in memories of Sarah. They learned to be patient with each other, to give space when it was needed and comfort when it was wanted. There was also the practical matter of Catherine's house in town. She owned it outright, Robert's life insurance having paid off the mortgage, and it provided a steady income from the boarder she had taken in. Jack made it clear that she should keep it, that he would never ask her to give up her independence or her security. That gesture of respect meant more to Catherine than he probably knew. In November, Jack took Catherine and Ruby to see a traveling theatrical company that had come through Silver Creek. They watched a melodrama about star-crossed lovers, and Ruby sat on Catherine's lap enthralled. Afterward, as they walked back to Catherine's house through the cold night, Ruby took both their hands and swung between them. "This is what I wanted," Ruby said happily. "A mama and a papa together like a real family." Jack and Catherine exchanged glances over her head. "Is that what you want, Ruby girl?" Jack asked. "For Catherine to be your mama for real?" "Yes," Ruby said emphatically. "More than anything." "Well then," Jack said, and stopped walking. He turned to Catherine, and even in the darkness she could see the nervousness and hope on his face. "Catherine Hayes, I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you love my daughter. I love how you make my house feel like a home and how you make me want to be a better man. We have not been courting for very long, but I know my own heart. Will you marry me?" Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Yes, Jack. Yes, I will marry you." Ruby let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the neighborhood and threw herself at Catherine's legs. Jack pulled both of them into his arms, and they stood there in the middle of the street, holding each other and laughing and crying all at once. They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning at the Silver Creek Church. It was a simple ceremony attended by the ranch hands from the Anderson place, Catherine's neighbors, and what felt like half the town. Ruby stood up with them holding a bouquet of dried flowers and beaming with pride. Catherine wore a dove gray dress she had made herself, and Jack wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed Catherine with such tenderness that several women in the pews had to dab at their eyes. The reception was held at the town hall, with food contributed by dozens of well-wishers. There was fiddle music and dancing, and Jack whirled Catherine around the floor while Ruby danced with the ranch hands and ate too much cake. It was joyful and warm, and Catherine felt surrounded by community and love in a way she had not experienced since before Robert died. That night, they returned to the ranch as a family. Jack carried a sleeping Ruby to her bed, and Catherine tucked her in, brushing the wild curls back from her forehead. "Good night, my sweet girl," Catherine whispered. "Good night, Mama," Ruby murmured, and Catherine's heart swelled to bursting. In their bedroom, Jack built up the fire against the winter cold. Catherine stood at the window looking out at the star-filled sky. She could feel Jack come up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Are you happy?" he asked. Catherine turned in his arms and looked up at him. I did not think I could be this happy again. I thought I had used up my share of joy. Me too, Jack said, but maybe we were wrong. Maybe we get more than one chance at happiness in this life. Maybe the people we loved before would be glad, Catherine said. Maybe they brought us to each other somehow. Jack kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Then I am grateful to them, and I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy and loving you the way you deserve to be loved. The winter that followed was cold but cozy. Catherine threw herself into making the cabin a true home, sewing quilts and curtains, teaching Ruby her letters and numbers, cooking hearty meals that filled the small house with warmth and good smells. Jack worked hard on the ranch, but he always came home with a smile, eager to see his wife and daughter. They settled into routines and rituals, family dinners every night, stories by the fire, church on Sundays, trips to town on Saturdays for supplies and socializing. Ruby thrived with two parents. She grew taller and more confident, her reading improving rapidly under Catherine's patient tutelage. She started calling Catherine Mama all the time now, without hesitation or self-consciousness. Catherine felt her heart grow 3 sizes every time she heard it. The physical side of marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Catherine had only ever known Robert, and Jack had only known Sarah, and they each brought their histories and hesitations to the marriage bed. But they were patient with each other, learning each other's bodies and preferences, building intimacy slowly and carefully. What they lacked in initial passion, they made up for in tenderness and genuine affection. As the months passed, their physical relationship deepened into something beautiful and satisfying for both of them. Spring came to Montana with a rush of green and the sound of melting snow. Catherine planted a garden behind the cabin, with Ruby helping to press seeds into the dark earth. Jack brought home a milk cow from town, and Catherine taught Ruby how to churn butter. Life felt abundant and full of promise. One evening in May, Catherine was preparing supper when a wave of nausea hit her so hard she had to sit down. Jack was immediately at her side, concerned. "Are you all right? Should I fetch the doctor?" Catherine took a shaky breath, and then realization dawned. She had been so busy and content that she had not noticed the signs, but now they seemed obvious. She was late. Her breasts were tender. She had been tired in the mornings. "Jack," she said slowly, "I think I might be with child." The look on his face was one of pure wonder. "Truly?" "I think so. I will need to see the doctor to be sure, but all the signs are there." Jack pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Our baby." Ruby, who had been playing with her doll in the corner, looked up with interest. "Am I going to have a brother or sister?" Catherine laughed through happy tears. "It seems that way, sweetheart." Ruby launched herself at them, and they all held each other. This family that had been cobbled together from grief and hope and chance now growing even larger. Dr. Hendricks confirmed the pregnancy the following week. Catherine was healthy, the baby was due in late December or early January, and everything looked good. Jack was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, hovering over Catherine with concern every time she so much as sneezed. Catherine found it endearing, though she had to remind him regularly that she was not made of glass. As her belly grew through the summer months, Catherine felt a contentment she had never experienced before. She had loved Robert, and their marriage had been good, but she had been young and unformed then, still figuring out who she was. With Jack, she came as a complete person, scarred but whole, and their love was built on understanding and mutual respect as much as attraction. Ruby was fascinated by the pregnancy, constantly wanting to feel the baby kick and asking endless questions about where babies came from and how they got out. Catherine answered as honestly as she could, given Ruby's age, and enlisted Jack's help when the questions got too complicated. In August, on a hot afternoon when Catherine was 6 months along and feeling the size of a barn, a stranger rode into the ranch. He was a rough-looking man with hard eyes, and he asked for Jack by name. Catherine, who had been sitting on the porch snapping beans with Ruby, felt a prickle of unease. Jack came out of the barn where he had been working, and his face went carefully neutral when he saw the stranger. "Can I help you?" "You Jack Morrison?" the man asked. "I am." "Name is Frank Butler. I worked with your wife's family back in Kansas. Sarah's father, Thomas Mitchell, he passed away last month, left some things to his granddaughter. I came to deliver them and pass on the message." Jack's face went pale. "Thomas is dead?" "Yep." Heart gave out. He wanted Ruby to have Sarah's things, her mama's jewelry and some family photos and such. Said he was sorry he never came to see her after Sarah passed, but he could not bear it. His only child, you understand? Catherine watched Jack struggle with emotions, grief and anger and old pain all tangled together. She stood up, moving as gracefully as her pregnant belly would allow, and came to stand beside her husband. She took his hand. "That was kind of Mr. Mitchell to think of Ruby," Catherine said to Frank Butler, "and kind of you to bring the things all this way." Frank tipped his hat to her. "You must be the new wife." Thomas heard Morrison had remarried. He was glad to know Ruby had a mama again. The items Frank delivered were precious: Sarah's wedding ring, a locket with her parents' photographs, a beautiful shawl that had belonged to Sarah's grandmother, and a dozen daguerreotypes of Sarah as a child with her family. There was also a letter from Thomas to Ruby, to be given to her when she was older, explaining why he had stayed away and telling her how much her mother had loved her. That night, after Ruby was asleep, Jack and Catherine looked through the photographs together. Catherine saw where Ruby got her curls and her smile. She felt no jealousy, only sadness for the young woman who had died too soon, and gratitude that something of Sarah could be preserved for her daughter. "Does it bother you?" Jack asked quietly. "Having her things in the house?" "No," Catherine said honestly. "She was Ruby's mother. She will always be part of this family. These things should be here, waiting for when Ruby is old enough to appreciate them." Jack kissed her softly. "I love you. I love how big your heart is." "I love you too," Catherine said. "All of you, including your past. It made you who you are." The baby came on a snowy January morning, 2 weeks later than Dr. Hendricks had predicted. Catherine labored for 8 hours with Jack pacing anxiously in the kitchen and Mrs. Anderson, the ranch owner's wife, assisting the doctor in the bedroom. Ruby stayed with a neighbor family, spared from the intensity of childbirth. When Catherine finally held her son in her arms, she wept with joy and relief. He was perfect, with a healthy set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Jack came in, looking terrified and awed in equal measure, and Catherine placed the baby in his arms. "A son," Jack said wonderingly. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. Jack looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I was thinking if you are agreeable, we could call him Robert, after your husband. He was a good man, and he was part of your life. I want to honor that." Catherine felt love for her husband overflow. "I think that is beautiful. Robert Thomas Morrison, after both the men who are part of our history." When Ruby came home and met her baby brother, she was instantly smitten. She wanted to hold him and help change him and fetch things for Catherine. She took her role as big sister very seriously. Life with a newborn was exhausting, but Catherine had Jack and Ruby to help, and Mrs. Anderson sent over meals for the first few weeks. Catherine healed well, and baby Robert was a relatively easy infant, sleeping in long stretches and nursing without difficulty. As the winter faded into spring and then summer, Catherine marveled at how full her life had become. 2 years ago, she had been a grieving widow, certain her chance at happiness had died with Robert in that mine. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, a daughter she adored, and a baby son who was growing and thriving. She had found not just survival, but joy. On a warm June evening, when Robert was 5 months old and Ruby was helping Catherine weed the garden, Jack came home from working the cattle with news. "Walter Anderson is retiring," he said. He is selling the ranch to his nephew, who is going to run it differently. He is bringing in his own foreman and crew. Catherine felt a flutter of worry. What does that mean for us? It means we will need to find somewhere else to live, and I will need to find new work, Jack said. But he was smiling. Or it means we take the money I have been saving and the money you have from the rent on your house in town, and we buy our own land, build our own ranch, start something that will be ours that we can pass down to Ruby and Robert and any other children we might have. Catherine stood up, her hands dirty from the garden. Our own ranch? Is that really possible? I have been looking into it, Jack said. There is 160 acres available about 10 miles west of here. Good water, good grazing. The house on it is small but solid. We could make it work if we are careful and work hard. Catherine looked at Ruby, who was watching them with bright, interested eyes. She looked at baby Robert sleeping in his basket in the shade. She looked at Jack, her husband, the man who had helped her learn to live again. Then let us do it, she said. Let us build something of our own. The next months were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Jack and Catherine bought the property in July, using their combined savings for the down payment and taking out a loan for the rest. The house was indeed small, just 3 rooms, but it had good bones and a beautiful view of the mountains. They moved in at the end of August, with help from the ranch hands and neighbors. Jack started small, buying a dozen head of cattle and focusing on building the operation slowly and sustainably. Catherine threw herself into making the house comfortable and productive, expanding her garden, and starting to raise chickens. Ruby started school in the nearby town of Clearwater, riding in each morning with a neighbor family and coming home full of stories about her lessons and friends. It was hard work, harder than anything Catherine had done before. There were days when she was so tired she could barely see straight, when the baby cried all night and the chickens got into the garden and Jack came home discouraged because a cow had died or the fence had broken. But there were also moments of profound satisfaction. The first time they sold cattle at market and made a profit. The first eggs from Catherine's chickens, Ruby reading an entire book out loud without help. Robert taking his first steps in the kitchen while Catherine made bread. They built their life one day at a time, one small victory at a time. Jack proved to be a skilled rancher and a good businessman, making smart decisions and treating the land with respect. Catherine kept the household running smoothly, managing their limited finances with care and finding ways to bring in extra money by selling eggs and vegetables and doing sewing work for neighbors. 2 years after they bought the ranch, Catherine found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She gave birth to a daughter in April, with Ruby helping to care for her baby sister from the moment she arrived. They named her Sarah Grace, honoring both Jack's first wife and the new beginning they had all found together. Ruby was 11 now, growing tall and confident, doing well in school and dreaming of becoming a teacher someday. Robert was a sturdy 3-year-old, trailing after his father and learning about the ranch. Catherine watched her family around the dinner table and felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. One evening after the children were in bed, and Catherine and Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Catherine leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we met?" she asked. "How Ruby asked that question in the general store and I just happened to be there?" "All the time," Jack said. "I think about how close we came to never knowing each other. If I'd gone to town a different day, or if you had been shopping somewhere else, our whole lives would be different." "I think we were meant to find each other," Catherine said. "I think Sarah and Robert, wherever they are, they wanted us to be happy. They pushed us together somehow." Jack turned and kissed her, slow and sweet. "Then I am grateful to them. And I'm grateful to you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy and his sad little girl." "You were never alone," Catherine said. "You had Ruby. You had your strength and your goodness. I just got lucky enough to be part of it." "We all got lucky," Jack said, pulling her closer. The years continued to unfold, bringing their share of challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, and hot summers when the creek ran low. There were illnesses and accidents, disappointments and setbacks. But there were also birthdays and holidays, new foals and successful harvests, Sunday dinners and evening dances in Clearwater. Ruby grew into a lovely young woman, smart and capable, and when she was 18, she left for the new teaching college in Helena, determined to pursue her dream. Jack and Catherine were proud and sad in equal measure, watching their first child step out into the world. But Ruby came home for holidays and summers, and she never forgot that she had two mothers, the one who had given her life and the one who had chosen to love her. Robert grew into a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to work it alongside his father. By the time he was 10, he was a skilled horseman and could do the work of a full-grown man. Jack taught him everything he knew, and Catherine taught him to read and write and do mathematics, ensuring he had the education he would need to run the ranch successfully someday. Sarah Grace was the baby of the family, sweet and funny, with her father's eyes and her mother's determination. She loved animals and wild places, and she spent her childhood roaming the ranch, collecting rocks and feathers and interesting bits of wood. Catherine saw echoes of herself in Sarah, that same stubborn independence tempered with deep feeling. When Catherine was 35, she gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named James and Elizabeth. The ranch was well established by then, profitable enough that they could afford help, and Catherine had mellowed into motherhood enough not to panic at the prospect of two babies at once. Ruby came home to help for a few months, and Jack hired a local girl to assist with the household chores so Catherine could rest and recover. The twins brought new energy and chaos to the household, but also immense joy. They were each other's best friends from the beginning, speaking their own language and getting into mischief together. Robert and Sarah adored them, and Jack walked around with a perpetual expression of bemused happiness at his large, loud, loving family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack took Catherine back to Silver Creek, to the general store where it had all begun. It had been bought by new owners and remodeled, but the basic structure was the same. They stood near where the pickle barrel had been, and Jack pulled Catherine close. 10 years ago, I was standing right here with Ruby, and she asked me why she did not have a mother, Jack said. It was one of the hardest moments of my life because I did not know how to give her what she needed. And then you walked over to us, this brave, kind woman who had every reason to stay wrapped up in her own grief, and you offered us a gift I can never fully repay. You have repaid it 1,000 times over, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family and a purpose and love. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Janfan, Jack said, and kissed her there in the general store, not caring who saw or what they thought. They went to dinner at the hotel restaurant, a rare extravagance, and stayed the night in a room overlooking the main street. It was the first time they had been alone together, really alone, in months, and they took full advantage of it. They talked late into the night about their children and their dreams for the ranch, about the past and the future, about all the ways their lives had exceeded anything they had imagined. The years rolled on, steady and sweet. Ruby became a teacher, married a good man named Samuel who treated her like a queen, and had 3 children of her own. She brought them to the ranch every summer, and Catherine delighted in being a grandmother. Robert took over more and more of the ranch operations as Jack's body began to feel the toll of decades of hard work. Sarah went to college in Missoula, studying biology, and came home with ideas about land conservation and sustainable ranching that she and Robert implemented together. The twins grew up quick and bright, James planning to become a doctor, and Elizabeth dreaming of being a writer. Catherine encouraged all their dreams, knowing that the world was changing and her children would have opportunities she never had. When Catherine was 45, Jack 50, they sat on the porch of their ranch house and watched the sun set over land they had built together. Their children were scattered between the house and the barn, the older ones visiting with their own families, the younger ones finishing evening chores. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted through the air. "Did you ever imagine this?" Catherine asked, gesturing at the scene before them. When you were standing in that general store with a heartbroken little girl, did you ever think you would have all of this? No, Jack said honestly. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, doing my best for Ruby, but never really being whole again. And then you walked over to us and offered to teach Ruby to make biscuits, and everything changed. I almost did not do it, Catherine admitted. I almost stayed by the fabric, minding my own business. I was scared. I'd gotten so used to being alone, to protecting myself from feeling anything. What made you do it? Jack asked, though they had discussed this before. It was a story they returned to sometimes, marveling at the small choices that had shaped their lives. Ruby's face, Catherine said. The way she looked when she asked about having a mother. I saw so much longing and confusion, and I just could not walk away. And maybe I saw in her what I was feeling myself. That longing for connection, for family, for someone to love and be loved by. Best decision either of us ever made, Jack said, taking her hand. Besides saying yes when you proposed, Catherine teased. Besides that, Jack agreed, grinning. Ruby came up onto the porch then, her oldest child on her hip. Mama, Papa, dinner is almost ready. Are you going to come inside? Catherine smiled at her daughter. This woman she had chosen to mother all those years ago. We will be right there, sweetheart. They sat a moment longer, hands clasped, watching the last of the sunset fade into twilight. Inside, their family waited. The family they had built from heartbreak and hope, from chance and choice, from courage and love. It had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. Thank you, Jack said quietly. For what? Catherine asked. For hearing Ruby that day, for being brave enough to speak up, for loving us. Catherine squeezed his hand. Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on a lonely widow who wanted to feel useful again, for building this life with me. They stood up together and walked into the house, into the warmth and noise and love that filled every corner. Around the long table they had built together, their children and grandchildren gathered, and Catherine said grace over the meal. Thank you for this food, for this family, for the blessings we have been given. Thank you for bringing us together and keeping us strong through the hard times. May we always remember to be grateful for each other and for the love that binds us. Amen, the family chorused. And then the meal began. Plates passing and conversations overlapping and laughter ringing through the house. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Catherine and Jack lay together in the darkness of their bedroom. They could hear the house settling around them, the soft sounds of their family sleeping under the same roof. I love you, Jack whispered into the dark. I love you too, Catherine replied, always and forever. They fell asleep as they always did, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the question that had been asked in a general store years ago, grateful for the answer that had been given, grateful for the life they had built together from that single moment of courage and compassion. The ranch thrived through the coming years, a testament to the hard work and love of the Morrison family. Ruby's children grew up visiting every summer, learning about cattle and horses and the land. Robert married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, and they had 4 children, who would eventually take over the operation. Sarah never married but became a renowned naturalist, writing papers about the Montana ecosystem that were published in academic journals back east. The twins went off to pursue their dreams, James becoming a doctor and Helena and Elizabeth publishing her first novel at 25. Jack and Catherine grew old together, their hands weathered and their hair gray, but their love as strong as ever. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Ruby gave a toast at the party, telling the story of how her mother and father had met, how a child's innocent question and a widow's compassionate answer had created a family that now numbered in the dozens. My first mother gave me life, Ruby said, her voice thick with emotion. And my second mother gave me love and home and everything that made that life worth living. I am grateful to both of them, and I'm grateful to my father for having the wisdom to see the gift he was being offered that day in the general store. When Jack was 78, his heart finally gave out while he was doing what he loved, riding fence line on a spring morning. Catherine was 76, and while losing him was devastating, she did not regret a single moment of their life together. She lived another 5 years surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about Jack and about Robert Hayes before him, keeping the memories alive. When Catherine passed in her sleep at 81, the funeral was attended by over 100 people whose lives she had touched. Ruby stood at the graveside, now in her 60s herself, and thought about that day in the general store when she had asked her father why she had no mother. She thought about the brave woman who had overheard and offered herself as an answer to that childish question. She thought about all the years of love and laughter, of hard work and family dinners, of bedtime stories and baked cookies in a home filled with warmth. She thought about how a single moment of courage and compassion could change not just one life, but dozens, could create a legacy that would endure for generations. She thought about how her mother, both her mothers, had loved her more than anything, and how lucky she had been to be given that gift twice. As the preacher spoke his final words and they lowered Catherine's casket into the ground next to Jack's, Ruby felt a hand slip into hers. Her own daughter, grown now with children of her own, smiled at her through tears. "Tell me again about how Grandma and Grandpa met," she whispered. Ruby smiled despite her grief. "It was in a general store in Silver Creek," she began. "I asked my papa why I had no mother, and a widow overheard and said maybe she could be." And in that moment, Ruby understood that the story would continue, passed down through the generations, a testament to love and second chances and the courage to reach out when someone needs you. Her parents' legacy was not just the ranch or the family they had built, but the lesson they had taught through their lives, that it is never too late for happiness, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to say, maybe I could be, to change the entire course of a life. The Morrison family continued to thrive on that Montana ranch for another 100 years, and they always remembered the story of how it began. With a little girl's question, a widow's answer, and a cowboy brave enough to accept the gift of love when it was offered to him again.